Hey guys, it's Emma Figling with TYT Politics. I hope everyone is having a lovely Monday. I know the weekend's over, but just so you know, Jordan's going to attempt to go live. He's still in Standing Rock. He's leaving soon, but he will attempt to go live from camp in about an hour or so, and last time he tried to go live, his phone died purely from the cold. That's how cold it is up there. So make sure to go check out Jordan's Facebook Live. And also, of course, tytnetwork.com/go. We're at about 250K in like a less than a week. And this is all to support TYT reporting. So if we reach 500K, then we'll actually be able to get another Jordan Sheridan. We're cloning him. That's the technology. Just kidding. But we're actually going to get another reporter. So come on, guys, build TYT Politics, tytnetwork.com/go. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this op-ed, of course, in the New York Times from Paul Krugman. He was the biggest Clinton apologist in the primary. He was the one that facilitated the Bernie Bro narrative. He's deep in the Clintons' pockets. He's someone who definitely wanted a position in the Hillary Clinton administration, and he's somebody who Bernie Sanders supporters in the primary definitely had qualms with, and rightfully so. This is some of the stuff he said about Bernie Sanders in the primary. It's a rough time for progressives who don't believe in magic. Yes, not long ago, many Sanders supporters were fulminating about how Hillary was going to steal the nomination by having superdelegates put her over the top despite losing the primaries. Conspiratorial, I guess. Now the Sanders strategy is to win by doing exactly that. Another thing he said, I'm quoting an article about him, criticizing his coverage of Bernie Sanders in the primary. For Krugman, because Hillary won big in the South by getting, quote, an overwhelming majority of black voters, this means that Bernie's brief statements are, quote, an effort to delegitimize these voters, saying that they are not real Democrats and shouldn't count. That's what he insinuated when he was saying that Hillary Clinton's voters, because Hillary won big in the South. I recall from the WikiLeaks that Hillary Clinton had a much more insidious strategy where she tried to paint Bernie Sanders as Jewish in the southern states. So Paul Krugman, forgive me if I'm not decrying Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders' phrasing of how Hillary won big in the South. He used Bernie bros all the time, regularly. This was in his article called "The Facts Have a Well-Known Center-Left Bias." After tweeting something negative about Trump, he said, "I'm also hearing from Bernie bros insisting that anything I say must be wrong because I criticize their hero. And this suggests to me that we need a clarification of the doctrine that facts have a well-known liberal bias. More specifically, they seem to have a center-left bias. Conservatives are big on empirical denial, but so is some in the U.S. left. This has become especially obvious in the waning days of the Democratic primary. You can watch data journalists like the two Nates, Cohen and Silver, growing increasingly exacerbated with Sanders supporters who keep insisting that Hillary is stealing the nomination with superdelegates, when it's actually the Sanders campaign talking about getting supers to overturn the pledged delegate count and win the popular vote." Okay, Paul Krugman, so why don't you quote Nate Silver with even more confidence? Do you know what Nate Silver also said? That there was no shot that Donald Trump was going to get the nomination. He also thought Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency, and by large margins. To be fair, Nate Silver altered those predictions, and he said that basically Trump had a 1 in 3 chance going into the election day. So unlike the frickin' Huffington Post, which had her chances at 98%. So Nate Silver at least addressed those concerns and doctored his predictions a little bit. I don't think 1 in 3 was a crazy prediction given the statistics, but quoting him with that smug overconfidence and saying Nate Silver is growing exacerbated with the facts. If you are so stringent to the facts, then why did you facilitate this Bernie chair throwing narrative when there was no evidence of it at all? So as you can imagine, Paul Krugman is gleeful about the news yesterday that Washington Post, it was a bombshell article basically saying that, yes, it's pretty obvious that Russia has infiltrated our electoral process and they were actively trying to get Donald Trump elected. That remains to be seen. I mean, the evidence is mounting in a way that seems like that's going to happen, but has the CIA lied before? Absolutely. Do we have any evidence? No. I'm starting to believe that maybe they were right all along, and maybe my skepticism was incorrect, but I'm not gonna turn over on my belly and and fall into this trap of believing everything that the CIA says. They should have an investigation, and there should be some accountability if Donald Trump was essentially a Russian plant, or Russians were trying to influence him getting the nomination, him getting the presidency, and they did so beyond WikiLeaks, and they tried to tap into our voting systems. That would be scary. So all I'm saying is let's have an investigation. But of course, establishment Democrats are jumping on the bandwagon immediately and saying that, yes, this is the whole reason that Hillary Clinton lost, and let's ignore everything else. So because they don't, they take news and word from the CIA that's convenient to them and facilitate that narrative. So Paul Krugman opens up by saying, the CIA, according to the Washington Post, has now determined that the hackers working for the Russian government worked to tilt the 2016 election to Donald Trump. This has actually been obvious for months, but the agency was reluctant to state that conclusion before the election out of fear that it would be seen as taking a political role. Meanwhile, the FBI went public 10 days before the election, dominating headlines and TV coverage across the country with a letter strongly implying that it might be able to find damning new evidence against Hillary Clinton, when it turned out literally to have found nothing at all. You're salty about that, aren't you? Did the combination of Russian and FBI intervention swing the election? Yes. Mrs. Clinton lost 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, by less than a percentage point, and Florida by only slightly more. If she had won any 3 of those states, she would be president-elect. Is there any reasonable doubt that Putin and Comey made the difference? Yes, actually, there is some reasonable doubt. Paul Krugman, the question isn't if Hillary could have won these states because of Putin and Comey. Maybe that did make some marginal difference. The question is why she didn't beat this clown by 15 percentage points in these states. You imbecile! That is not the question. You are losing the forest through the trees. The problem is that she was running against an idiot unlike we've ever seen, a reality show host that did not have any electoral experience. He was merely a crowd surfer and merely someone who rode the wave of populism to get where he is today. He was a liar. He was an accused sexual assaulter. He said Mexicans were rapists. He is the most beatable candidate in history. And you're lamenting about Comey and Putin? That's what you're talking about right now instead of reevaluating your entire stance and your entire candidate and your entire outlook? So yes, did this small issue maybe make a difference in the election? Perhaps. But listen to these statistics. 5% less African Americans came out to vote, 6% less Latinos, 6% less 18 to 27-year-olds came out versus what happened in 2012, which is when we had an incumbent president running against a much weaker candidate, when we kind of knew Obama was, towards the end, we knew President Obama was probably going to win. So that's the bigger issue, is that no one wanted to come and no one turned out. Do the voters in, like you listed, do the voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania care that deeply about James Comey and Vladimir Putin? No, like Bill Clinton's team said, it's the economy, stupid. And I know you have deep ties to the Clintons, so you know that phrase and you probably worship it and recite it while you kneel by your bedside table before you go to bed. That's speculation, journalistic speculation, so don't take that word as fact. Paul Krugman does not, in fact, say it's the economy, stupid, before he goes to bed every night. Disclaimer. So, in Krugman's effort to get it, he completely misses it. The voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan were not paying that much attention to what you were paying attention to, Paul Krugman. It's a classic case of the establishment thinking that everything that matters to them in their little bubble matters to the rest of the country. No. In fact, the issue was that they're hurting and they need to work 2 or 3 jobs, and the jobs that used to be there weren't there anymore. And you, Paul Krugman, who are one of the champions of globalism, have had a massive hand in that reality. And it wouldn't have been seen as a marginal victory either. Even as it was, Mrs. Clinton received almost 3 million more votes than her opponent, giving her a popular margin close to that of George W. Bush in 2004. So this was a tainted election. If not, as far as we can tell, stolen in the sense that votes were counted wrong, and the result won't be overturned. But the result was nonetheless illegitimate in important ways. The victor was rejected by the public and won the Electoral College only thanks to foreign intervention and grotesquely inappropriate partisan behavior on the part of domestic law enforcement. So again, only because of those reasons is what you're saying, Paul Krugman. And secondly, you want to talk about a rigged election? You want to talk about a tainted election? In the articles I just read earlier, you just spat in the face of Bernie Sanders supporters for saying the exact same thing. Saying, oh, the super delegates, they didn't have any influence. Oh, the primaries in Arizona and California and New York, they were totally normal. You want to talk about a tainted election? You smug son of a bitch? Because you didn't give a damn when it was helping your candidate. The woman who was going to give you a job and put you in office. In other words, nothing that happened on Election Day or is happening now is normal. Democratic norms have been and continue to be violated, and anyone who refuses to acknowledge that reality is in effect complicit in the degradation of our new republic, or of our republic. You know what? I would consider you complicit in that degradation. I actually consider you complicit in the rise of Donald Trump because of you propping up your immensely flawed candidate with absolute inaccuracies, with lies, with Bernie bro narratives, because it was economically convenient for you, right? You wanted that job, right? Politics being what it is, moral backbones on Capitol Hill, those don't exist, will be stiffened if there are clear signs that the public is outraged by what is happening. And there will be a chance to make that outrage felt directly in 2 years, not just in congressional elections, but in votes that will determine control of many state governments. Now, outrage over the tainted election pass can't be the whole of opposition politics. It will be crucial to maintain the heat over actual policies. Everything we've seen so far says that Mr. Trump is going to utterly betray the interests of the white working class voters who were his most enthusiastic supporters, stripping them of health care and retirement security, and this betrayal should be highlighted. But we ought to be able to look both forward and back, to criticize both the way Mr. Trump gained power and the way he uses it. Personally, I'm still figuring out how to keep my anger simmering. Letting it boil over won't do any good, but it shouldn't be allowed to cool. This election was an outrage, and we should never forget it. I agree, Paul Krugman, and you were a part of the outrage. So, what I want to take away from this, and I guess my analysis is just that Donald Trump is merely a manifestation of the sickness at this nation's core. And he's kind of like if you put cyanide or an active flu virus into a Pepto-Bismol bottle and you dyed that pink and then you gave it to the hurting people in this country and you said, take this, it'll make you feel better, and they took it enthusiastically. That's what Donald Trump is. But there was already a sickness there. This just made it worse. Or eventually it'll make the fever break. That's the more optimistic view of it. But Paul Krugman is wanting to blame the active flu virus and the frickin' Pepto-Bismol bottle. This is a very convoluted analogy. And not acknowledge the sickness that came before. That forced people to take that Pepto-Bismol bottle. They were sick. But not for you. Not for you in Washington. It was your candidate's turn. In Washington and New York, everyone loved Hillary Clinton. But now, when you had a scandal in Washington and New York when James Comey came out the second time, and when Putin involved himself, that was a scandal for you. So what you think is that every little person in the country, in the middle of the country, thought that was the breaking point for them. Oh, I'm not voting for Hillary Clinton because James Comey came out and said something I already knew about her emails being shady. That's what you think did it in for her? That's not the question. The question is why she didn't landslide Donald Trump. And I think that's already a conclusion that I've reached why she didn't. She was a weak candidate that didn't speak to them, and she adhered to your notion of globalism that you aren't even pretending to question right now. You're just blaming it on the crumbs. You're losing the forest through the trees, and it's very convenient for you to do so, isn't it, Paul Krugman? So, Donald Trump is merely, again, a manifestation of the decay in our nation. He represents the worst of us: racism, xenophobia, bombast, narcissism, self-obsession, all of those things. But he also represents that sickness that Paul Krugman is refusing to acknowledge. So he represents change at any cost. And the Democrats refuse to see, the establishment Democrats refuse to see that that's what people wanted. They wanted change at any cost. And he represents desperation, most of all. A desperation that Paul Krugman is completely detached from and does not understand. And if the CIA's claims are true, that remains to be seen, Russia saw an opening where they wanted Donald Trump to win, I guess. We don't know if that's going to happen. We don't know if that's the reality. An investigation has to happen. But if that is the case, they saw an opening, and they saw that sickness in this country, and Russia said, all right, take that flu virus, take that cyanide. Already ill nation. So blaming Putin and blaming Comey is just the small potatoes, and it's convenient for him to only focus on the small potatoes. So that's all I have to say really about that. Paul Krugman. He should already be disqualified because he used Bernie Bros, and he also wrote an article called "The Facts Have a Well-Known Center-Left Bias." The arrogance. It's revolting.